Before we dive in, I wanted to share that this episode discusses topics related to abortion. There may be some sensitive content discussed throughout today's episode, so please be aware and cautious if this is a sensitive subject for you.
I am proud to be a woman.
Girls and women are
powerful,
beauty,
badass,
feminine,
passion,
equality,
power, professional,
diligence,
advocates for change.
Welcome to She Plus, the female empowerment podcast that tells the extraordinary stories of everyday women. I'm your host, Elise Dean. On today's episode, we sat down with Renee Bracey Sherman, who is an abortion storyteller. But before lifting up the stories of other people's abortions, Renee had her own abortion story to tell. When Renee was 19 years old, she had an abortion.
There's no feeling like having someone in your body when you don't want it to be there. Be it, a pregnancy, be it a sickness, something, a thought, a mental health thought, If you don't want it there, it's really hard to get it out. And so my abortion could not come fast enough. He dropped me off. He left me at the clinic, did not want to come inside because he said, quote, "You're killing a piece of us." And I was like, yeah, this relationship's over. So it was actually a really good thing and really eye-opening and awakening for me. And I went to the appointment and the nurses were really, really wonderful. I remember being really jealous of this other girl who, she was probably like 15 or 16 maybe. She's a little bit younger than I was. And she was sitting across from me with her boyfriend on her right, my left, and her mom to her left. And I remember just being jealous that she had two people there supporting her. And I felt really lonely. When I was in the clinic for my abortion, it was all of 5 minutes. I was sedated, so I don't really remember much. I remember laying back and them having me count backwards from 10 to make sure the sedation was working. So I remember saying like 10, 9, 8, and then waking up and like saying 7, 6, and then we're like, it's over. Stop counting. So no time had passed for me. I remember they cutouts from like a National Geographic magazine with butterflies on the ceiling. And so it really symbolized to me this metamorphosis that I was having in my life.
The experience of having an abortion can be different for everyone. No one experience looks or feels the same, and everyone has a different story to tell. And that's where Renee's work comes in today. They call Renee the Beyoncé of abortion storytelling. And it's because she really is the Beyoncé of abortion storytelling. What was once a simple bio on her social media profile has now become the defining title of her daily work.
The work that I do is really about building the leadership of people who've had abortions, for us to share our stories, for us to speak out, and for us to be the voices and the leaders and the faces of this movement, and to actually be representative of who has abortions and why. So that's kind of where my work has been. The way I got the name, the Beyoncé of Abortion Storytelling, where someone had tweeted, whatever you do, whatever field you're in, be the Beyoncé of your work, right? And so someone sent it to me and said, you're the Beyoncé of abortion storytelling. Her work is really just like a love letter to Black people. It is saying, look at us in all of our different facets. Look at all of us in our beauty. So I really think about, how do I do that for people who've had abortions? And I think for so long, we've kind of been told that you have to have this like what I call abortion exceptionalism, in that you have to justify your abortion. I felt a lot of pressure early on in my storytelling work to kind of justify why I had an abortion, to show that I had an abortion and I made something of myself.
The reality of abortion exceptionalism is a legitimate feeling. But what is it? So often it seems that a woman must justify her abortion so that she can reach success in life, so she can go to college or finally get that promotion. The narrative that abortions allow women to become more successful versions of themselves is something that Renee actively speaks out against. Renee, like many others, chose to get an abortion because she simply didn't want to be pregnant. Like she said earlier, there's no feeling like having something in your body that you simply don't want there. In Renee's work, there is nothing wrong with choosing to have an abortion because you simply don't want to have a child, whether that be at that moment in time or ever.
When I started realizing that I actually wanted to do work on abortion, my commitment is always to make sure that people who have abortions don't feel alone. I don't want other people to feel that feeling that I did. And so that's why I volunteer to drive people to their appointments. They stay at my house because abortion can be a really isolating experience. Even if you do have someone who supports you, they might not be able to make it to the appointment with you, particularly for folks who have to travel for an abortion. So if I can be that person on the other end of the flight or the train, I'm happy to do that. If I can be the person holding your hand in the clinic, I'm happy to do that because I didn't have that. But a couple of weeks ago, I drove a woman. I ended up driving a total of 12 hours, but I picked her up in Pennsylvania, and then we drove back into Maryland so she could have a medication abortion. And so it was almost a 2-hour drive each way for her. And then I did the same thing a couple weeks later when she needed a follow-up appointment. And you become fast friends in these road trips. Even if we have very different experiences, there's still something so powerful about us connecting over the same experience.
It's no secret that abortions, birth control, and the right to choose are heavily debated issues in this country today. Renee already knew that when she walked into her work as an abortion storyteller, which has made her all the more prepared when people voice a different opinion.
People who troll me on the internet and write me hate mail and disgusting letters and things like that will tell me, what would you do if your mom had aborted you? And I'm like, first off, my mother chose me. She specifically told me that. You have no idea what decisions my mom did or didn't make in her life. But also, my parents support my work. They are so proud of my work. And it is sad that you cannot conceive of a world where parents are supportive of their children's decisions and that a parent could support a child's decision whether or not to become a parent. Where do you think I got the values to support abortion access and bodily autonomy from? I get it from my mama, And I think that that's so sad for me to hear from other people, because that just is why I say that everyone loves someone who's had an abortion. Remember that the things you're saying, someone you love is hearing them, and they're remembering that you're not a safe person to go to, and that they're never going to share with you because you've said some really awful things to people like me and about people who've had abortions.
Rather than interacting with people who disagree with her work, Renee has her attention focused elsewhere, on the people who have had abortions, on the people who want their stories lifted, on the people who need support most of all.
I'm not going to engage with someone and argue my humanity with them. That is a waste of my time. What I can spend my time doing is talking to people who've had abortions to make sure they see their own humanity in their lives, that they feel valued and loved and respected. Does that mean I don't engage with people who still will say, I don't agree with abortion, I think it's killing? No. I mean, if you want to have a fair conversation and you actually want to talk and not denigrate me, I'm happy to have that conversation on my terms when I actually feel like it. No, I'm not going to let you destroy my Sunday afternoon with that. But I think when in response to them, I have a view that people will say, well, abortion's ending a potential life. That is true. And I'm okay with that. Some people say, like, it's just a clump of cells, and I don't necessarily totally agree with that, because I think it's more than that. I think, like, it is a clump of cells that, if allowed to grow, will become a child. That is true. And I am not naive to the fact that I decided to terminate a pregnancy and that became not a child. I knew exactly what I was doing, and I made that decision, and that is okay. And I think people, particularly in the US, are afraid of talking about death, and are afraid of talking about that we actually make decisions every day to allow certain people, things to live and others to die. Whether it is how our meat is made, to we don't support enough services to make sure homeless people on the street live to see another day. How many people who believe that abortion is killing walk past a homeless family on the street without giving them money, without being willing to increase their taxes to make sure they have somewhere to stay, to make sure they have food, SNAP benefits, Medicaid, every single day. Every single day, we make a decision to not have a national health system. People are dying because they cannot afford insulin. And I believe that that is a greater travesty than me deciding I am not ready to become a parent. And I'm okay with that. People can disagree with me on that, but that is the way I see it. And I'm going to work to make sure that the children who are here and the people who are here have the best lives possible and are able to succeed in that and thrive. And we have to make decisions. My question is why is it that white anti-choice people have so many tears for a potential life, but not Ayanna Stanley Jones and not Tamir Rice, children who have been murdered by police? School shootings, our tax dollars paid for that. But they're screaming about don't allow tax dollars to pay for abortions. Our tax dollars pay for the murder of a lot of people.
The sentiment that our tax dollars pay for the murder of a lot of people is all too familiar right now in this very moment. The brutal murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor remain stitched into the fabric of here and now. And Renee asks, why are we so focused on the unborn when children are actively dying across the country and the globe on a daily basis? There's also something to be said for the whitewashing of abortion storytelling, something I truthfully didn't know about until my interview with Renee. Like much of American history, Black people have consistently been erased from the narrative for hundreds of years, and that includes the history of abortion. From Roe v. Wade to practicing as abortion providers, Black people have been involved in the conversation from the start. But if you look in your history books or watch documentaries, that's not what you'll see.
When people talk about abortion in the United States, they'll often, a lot of the documentaries, right, they'll talk about Roe v. Wade as the beginning point. And they'll talk about a couple of the years prior to where abortion was illegal in some states, legal in others, and people had to travel and what it was like. So they tend to kind of talk about the mid-60s to the 70s. Photos tend to be from that moment. All the photos tend to always have white women in them. There were folks of color who were organizing, but they just leave them out of the conversation. And that whitewashing does a huge disservice to the activists of color from then, because you've erased their memories, but also those of us who are doing this work now who get erased. because it makes it seem like we're just coming to the table when actually we've been doing this since time immemorial, right? It also allows for the anti-abortion movement to push these ahistorical narratives. They say that abortion is like slavery or the Holocaust. And yet, one of my friend's family members is a Holocaust survivor who's an abortion provider. How can you say that? How can you say that the systematic murder of people, the systematic brutalization and beating them for hundreds of years, 400 years, slavery, is like deciding to go to the doctor and saying, I'm actually not ready to be a parent. They were forced into parenthood, and then their kids were taken from them and sold off, forced to work, or died. How? And it ignores the fact that Black women, enslaved people, were having abortions during slavery. Why? Because they did not want to have a child born as chattel and born into the horrors of their situation. It's also really difficult to flee if you have a child or while pregnant. To compare it is just really offensive to Black folks and all that our ancestors fought, but also, I think, not talking about our really beautiful history of making sure that we took care of us and took care of what we need allows these myths to just thrive. And then lastly, I'll just say that we need to talk about that there were so many Black abortion providers around the turn of the century and throughout the years because the white doctors would not see Black patients. That is real in our history. And that is in every area of healthcare. That is not just abortion, right? But we need to be honest about that. And I think the more we actually have these conversations, we actually can break down and talk about the racism in this country and have a fuller conversation about what has abortion access looked like, what does it look like, and what the future will look like.
Coming up after the break,
there can be people who regret their abortions and still think that it was the right decision, or regret their abortions and want to make sure that other people still have that decision.
This message is brought to you by She Plus Podcast.
At She Plus, lifting up stories and voices is an important part of the work we do, which is why I love shopping for products at Mess in a Bottle, a Black-owned business that aims to give voice to the voiceless. All of Mess in a Bottle's products display important messages that you'll be proud to wear while quarantined in your house. From t-shirts emblazoned with the word fearless to sweatshirts that say, as strong as the woman next to me, you're bound to find something that speaks to you. Check out my latest post to see what I bought from Mess in a Bottle. Shop now at messinabottle.com. Welcome back. On this episode of She Plus, we're talking about abortion with Renee Bracey Sherman. When I interviewed Renee, I asked her, though abortions are an experience that women go through, have you ever helped any men deal with their partners getting an abortion? What I neglected to realize at the time, and what Renee thankfully showed me, is that I was ignorantly looking at abortion through strictly a male-female lens. But trans men have abortions too. Non-binary people have abortions too.
I want to get us out of the binary, that men and women, right? I work with non-binary and trans people who have abortions as well. So yes, I work with trans men who have abortions and non-binary folks who can get pregnant. And I think that's a really beautiful experience for them to talk about seeking an abortion and also the barriers that we don't think about, particularly in the movement when we frame abortion as only like a woman's issue, that keeps them from feeling seen. It makes them feel invisibilized. And trans people need access to healthcare. They need access to competent healthcare. And they shouldn't have to like be going to a clinic and having to like train the provider how to care for them, particularly as they're dealing with terminating a pregnancy. So there's that. But then also in addition to your question, yes, I've worked with cisgender men who supported a partner through an abortion and share their stories. And I think it can be really beautiful because it's like, here's what I think we need role models for cis men to stand up and say, here's what it's like to support someone. Here's how you should support someone. I recently wrote an article for Playboy about the election. And, you know, I asked the presidential candidates about their plans for abortion. I sent them like 7 questions. And some people asked me why I would write for Playboy. And really it's because I think that we do focus a lot of our attention on cis women. And I think that we need to challenge the conversation and engage cis men as well, that they can be supportive. I do not think that they should get to tell the pregnant person what to do with their body. I do not think that they should take up more space, take up unnecessary space in the conversation and in the movement. And I do think that we need a wide variety of spokespeople, but also they need to do the work of like acknowledging their privilege and like the space that they take up. And in the abortion decision, I think that they need to follow the lead of the pregnant person. We can have an expansive conversation about what womanhood is and make sure that it's inclusive of non-binary and trans women. But also let's talk about that within men and masculinity as well. I think it's important to say, for me, like, here's how I wish my partner had shown up for me during my abortion. Here's what I wish had happened. And I think that that would then show men understanding how to be there. Because I think they're not really engaged on either way. Like no one is engaging them necessarily. And the men who are engaged on abortion are trying to ban it. And so it's like, how do we give a better role model and give them an active role in this and say, here's what you can do.
And if you're listening to this and looking for the resources on exactly what Renee is saying, look no further than the film and television industry. Shonda Rhimes consistently represents abortion in her TV shows like Grey's Anatomy.
I know it's my body, but you are free to have feelings.
If you want to have this kid, I'll suck up my fears and I'll be a dad because, well, I mean, let's be honest, kids love me. And if you don't want it, I'll drive you to the appointment. I will be there for you in every way I possibly can.
So much of the debate on abortion rights is focused on ending a life. But what many aren't considering is that the right to choose also includes the choice to have children and the choice to control the circumstances in which those children are conceived. Michelle Williams said it best in her 2020 Golden Globe speech.
To choose when to have my children and with whom, when I felt supported and able to balance our lives, knowing as all mothers know that the scales must and will tip towards our children. Now, I know my choices might look different than yours, but thank God, or whomever you pray to, that we live in a country founded on the principle that I am free to live by my faith and you are free to live by yours.
Aside from personal opinions on abortion, there are numerous scientific studies that tackle the debate on abortion. Much of the anti-abortion argument rests on the feeling of regret in the years following an abortion. Well, there's a study for that. The study, which was conducted over a span of 5 years, aimed to target the feelings an individual experienced following their abortion. And I'll let the expert, Renee, recap it for you.
I know some of the researchers who worked on it, so I'm cheating a tiny bit. But when they decided to do it, they set out there are all these myths about abortion. Abortion causes breast cancer. Abortion causes depression. Abortion will ruin your relationship. Your abortion will, whatever. They're ridiculous. I've also heard that abortion causes tornadoes and earthquakes and all sorts of stuff. The myths are just wide-ranging. But what they set out to do was to actually investigate those questions. Does abortion cause breast cancer? Does abortion cause depression? Does abortion, impact you financially? And so they did this huge longitudinal study and found out that no, it doesn't. And I think one thing that kind of gets missed in the headline of only 5% regret their abortion. So that means 95% do not regret their abortions. But the other thing is that, and the number one reported feeling has always been relief after. But one of the things I think is okay is that there can be people who regret their abortions and still think that it was the right decision, or regret their abortions and want to make sure that other people still have that decision. They can say, it might not have been the right decision for me, but I know it's the right decision for other people. So to say that someone regrets their abortion also does not necessarily cover the actual complexity of people's feelings and emotions. And if somebody regrets their abortion and thinks that abortion is illegal, well, it should be illegal, that's fine. That's their opinion. That's for their experience. There are a lot of people who also regret their adoptions. There are definitely people who regret having kids. But we do not allow people as a society to talk about those things. We only allow it as their frame regret as an abortion pregnancy decision. We don't allow for complex feelings and complex emotions. And so I think it's an important data point. Say that, look, overwhelming majority of people who have abortions do not regret their decision. And we should talk about why we focus so much on regret.
Now, before we go, I want to leave you with 2 different abortion stories. I reached out to abortion storytellers H.K. Gray and Alejandra Pablos to share their abortion stories.
My name is H.K. Gray.
Hi, my name is Alejandra Pablos.
I'm a proud teen mom.
I'm a reproductive justice community organizer and abortion storyteller.
I had my procedure at Whole Woman's Health in Fort Worth, Texas when I was 17 years old.
I've had multiple abortions. I've had 4 abortions in the span of my lifetime, and I was about 30 some years old, and I was living in DC. I was already a reproductive justice organizer working nationally at the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health, where I got to really, really empower myself, build strong agency to be able to be bold and out loud about the decisions I had made that year and I have made before multiple times.
At the time, I had already been living separate from my parents for a few years because my dad was homeless and my mom had been in and out of the system the majority of my life. Because of my parents' absence, I had already had to deal with disparities in accessing healthcare compared to other people my age. I wasn't able to go to the dentist or a doctor without parental consent, which made it impossible to go. In fact, the only reason I was able to access prenatal care when I was 15 was because I was able to consent to the care of my daughter, but not myself.
Coming into a very new Planned Parenthood, I expected to have just a really good experience, and that wasn't the case. Of course, coming into the clinic, even though I had a whole squad of my homegirls with me, it was the first time I was actually fully supported. Again, I had multiple abortions, and the first 3 of them were just awful. I probably told maybe one person, just kept it to myself. And this last one, I was able to have a lot of friends there, a lot of emotional support. But of course, they're not allowed to wait in the waiting room with you.
Because of this, when I found I was pregnant again, I knew I was going to have to go through some sort of parental involvement laws to get my abortion. What I didn't know was that this time when trying to access healthcare, I was going to be shamed, degraded, and made to feel inadequate before I was even able to consent for care I had known I needed. I ended up having to go through judicial bypass, which is the exhausting legal process of forcing a minor to share very personal experiences and state-mandated, medically inaccurate information in an almost test-like hearing in order to get the judge, who is a complete stranger, to decide whether I was responsible and mature enough to consent to an abortion.
So when I step into the second clinical area to wade, it's completely different than the energy I brought in. The clinic is just, the clinic was just, it had an aura of sadness and shame. Nobody was talking to each other. None of the nurses were smiling, happy, welcoming us, to a place where we can feel empowered to make decisions over our bodies that are the best for us, right?
When I got to go before the judge, I was asked very personal and invasive questions, all while being degraded no matter how I answered. Some of the questions I was asked was why I was having sex in the first place, why I wasn't into using condoms, why I wasn't able to tell my parents, and even why my dad was homeless. They tried to make me feel like having an abortion was wrong, but so is being a teen mom. I felt like no matter how I answered the judge's questions, I was going to be denied, but I got lucky and got my judicial bypass granted after a 2-hour process of being degraded for all of my life choices.
Finally, I go into the questionnaire part of the process of getting an abortion, where they ask you a lot of questions that really feel intruding. I wish I would have really had an abortion doula with me for support, and you just really feel like there's this invasive process that you didn't consent to. So that was awful. Then I go back to the ultrasound part. They take ultrasound because of course it's needed, which I don't want it. I don't want a picture. They still offer me a picture, a picture of the ultrasound. And then they said if it's more than one heartbeat, do I want to change my mind then? Right? So repeatedly being treated like I already didn't come in there with my decision made. Like I'm not the one that best knows what I need.
Luckily, I found Jane's Due Process from Google, and they helped with everything from hooking me up with an amazing lawyer for free, helped file and fight for my case, to paying for part of my procedure and checking up on me after I got my abortion. They also connected me with my local abortion fund, the Texas Equal Access Fund, who helped pay for my abortion and became a huge part of my support system in storytelling.
I remember after the procedure was done, I was feeling extremely, extremely woozy and heavy. And I remember, even though I knew the answer that my friends couldn't come into the clinical room, I remember just because I was so heavy and I couldn't even see myself getting up to put my clothes on, I said, can my friends come and help me? And of course the nurses were like, no. So I'm trying really hard to get up and get out of the bed and go to get my clothes on. And all I remember is seeing this nurse just opened to exit the clinical room and just waiting, watching me struggle and put my things on. And when I was ready and I walked past her, I said, you're an awful nurse. I told her because I remember being like, yo, you can't even help me right now. I just asked for support.
Since I had to get a judicial bypass, I ended up getting my abortion at 14 weeks, even though I had known I was pregnant at about 2 or 3 weeks. I had contacted JDP the same week I found out I was pregnant, but I still had to wait 2 weeks for the clinic to squeeze me in for my initial visit, go back to the clinic 3 times because of trap laws, had to meet with my lawyer twice, and have a meeting with an anti-choice judge, all while being the primary care provider for my daughter and dealing with the holidays.
For me, it was wow, shocking that in 2017, this is still happening at the newest Planned Parenthood, right? These are our allies. These are people that I work closely with. And to be just treated like that. And again, having the agency, having the knowledge, I still was treated like that. I can only imagine folks that speak, have other barriers and how they're going to feel and how they're going to be pushed away from, accessing what's rightfully theirs.
I was able to get my abortion the next day and was in wonderful care with the people at Women's Health. I dealt with a lot of shame after my procedure and felt like I was hiding something from all my loved ones who didn't know I'd had an abortion. I now know that the things I had to go through to access abortion care was wrong and unjust. I hope that in sharing my story, people will become aware of the disparities poor people have to deal with when it comes to accessing healthcare in general, but especially when it comes to accessing abortions.
I think I'm ready, to explore being a mother, but things just keep getting tougher and tougher, right? The attacks on our bodies are they're getting stronger, and it's really scary out here to even think of creating a family when you don't know what's going to happen.
That's it for this episode of She Plus. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.